Hi. Today I'm going to read you Virtue and Terror, a speech given by Maximilien Robespierre during the radical stage of the French Revolution when he was a leader of the National Convention and the Committee of Public Safety. In this speech, Robespierre is going to argue that virtue is only useful in a revolutionary sense if it is accompanied by terror. And the Reign of Terror is the event that makes Robespierre perhaps the most infamous person in the French Revolution. He certainly bears some responsibility for the deaths of up to 40,000 to 50,000 people in the Reign of Terror, which he is one of the most powerful spokespersons for. Robespierre only lives for about 6 months after he delivers this speech, as he becomes paranoid, starts accusing other members of the Committee of Public Safety of being counter-revolutionary, and as they begin to get their heads chopped off in the guillotine, they turn on Robespierre, and he is killed as a result of that. So this speech is given on February 5th, 1794, and Robespierre dies in early July that same year. On each side of me, you can see portraits of Robespierre. He's also known as initially in his life, a great defender of Republican values and democratic values of the Revolution, a close follower of the ideas of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And then right behind me here, you can see the events leading up to Robespierre's death. He's in the cart over here by the gallows. There's somebody else getting their heads chopped off, not the gallows, sorry, in the guillotine. And Robespierre's relative is on their way up the stairs, and Robespierre's, as I said, in the cart, waiting to be executed. This is the speech that promotes and lays the groundwork for the terror, or the Reign of Terror. And this is one of the two instruments that the National Convention uses when it comes to power after it overthrows the king in the Legislative Assembly, which is the result of the Legislative Assembly losing control of France because of all the armies that have invaded, and losing the credibility towards the French people and the trust of the French people, because the Legislative Assembly covers up the escape, or attempted escape rather, of Louis XVI as he was on his way to try to raise armies and come back and crush the revolution. So in this speech, Robespierre, who by the way is against the death penalty, is going to argue that in order to save the revolution, that terror must be used. And when we talk about terror, we want to know that the terror, or the Reign of Terror, isn't a name given to this period in revolutionary France by later generations. It was actually the National Convention who said our state policy needs to be terror, right? Because we're going to need to terrorize the elements of the population that are fighting against the revolution and its ideals in order to win. And then, of course, the other instrument that the convention brings into play is the levy en masse, when they create the largest standing army in the history of the world of over 1 million persons, which eventually repels all the invading armies of France and goes on to conquer several other countries. So this speech is called Virtue and Terror. And in this speech, Robespierre is going to argue that in order to establish virtue, which is the ultimate goal of the revolution, they must use terror. Okay? Okay, so we begin. He says, what is the aim we want to achieve? The peaceful enjoyment of liberty and equality, the reign of that eternal justice whose laws have been engraved not in stone and marble, but in the hearts of all men, even in the heart of the slave who forgets them, or of the tyrant who denies them. So his ultimate goal is that everybody can enjoy liberty and equality, which is what the French Revolution is all about. And notice behind me I have the French tricolor, the flag of revolutionary France. And liberty and equality represented by the colors of the flag, as well as fraternity. And then on either side of me here, I have a famous painting, Liberty Leading the People. And here you see the French revolutionaries represented by the common people here, this kid, holding twin pistols and being guided by liberty as a woman carrying the French tricolor, trampling over the bodies of the nobility. And so what does he want? He wants liberty and equality. And not necessarily laws that have been written down by men, but the natural law that folks like Rousseau talked about, that we all feel within our hearts, that comes from nature. And he goes on. We want a state of affairs where all despicable and cruel passions are unknown, and all kind and generous passions are aroused by laws. And so here, in this picture, or in these photos, you see on the left, we have the execution of some Polish folks by some fascists or some Marxists. And I put this up here to represent that as he's giving this speech, he knows that his men have committed massacres, the September massacres, and are beginning this reign of terror where they're rounding up all of the counter-revolutionary forces and putting them to the guillotine. But what he's saying is, we truly don't want this to continue. What we want is law that people follow based on their generosity and their love of their country and their love of law. And over here, I have this idea represented by the police officer and the person he's pulled over to give a ticket, having a mutually respectful interaction where there's no violence, and people simply respect the law because they love to live under the law, because they understand that it's the law that's going to give them the freedom and equality that they so desire. Where ambition is the desire to deserve glory and serve the fatherland, and where distinctions arise only from equality itself. And notice on this picture, on my left, I have Maximilian Robespierre, and on my right, I have Napoleon Bonaparte. And I put them up there because these are both, well, not both members of the Third Estate. Robespierre is a member of the Third Estate and makes a name for himself as a speaker, writer, and lawyer. So he rises through the ranks based on his merit in a state of semi-equality among members of the Third Estate, of course. As we know, there were extremely wealthy people and extremely poor people in that estate. And then Napoleon, and Napoleon's a good example of promotion by merit because he's born into a not particularly powerful noble family in Corsica, and using his merit he's able to rise through the military ranks to general by, I believe, age 24. So they are examples of folks who rise in life due to their merits in a state of more or less equality among their peers for the time. Where citizen submits to magistrate, the magistrate to the people, and the people to justice. Where the fatherland guarantees the well-being of each individual, and where each individual enjoys the pride, the prosperity, and the glory of the fatherland. And so the magistrates, the court systems are respected by the people, which we see over here in our picture of youth court. And then where the magistrates and the officials ultimately serve the people. And this is where you see voting for all of these positions. So the power comes back down to the people who want to serve the country. Where all souls elevate themselves through constant communication of Republican sentiments and through the need to deserve the esteem of a great people. Where the arts are the decorations of liberty that ennobles them, where commerce is the source of public wealth, and not only of the monstrous opulence of a few houses. And so again, we see the equality of people on campuses represented in student voting, the students supporting their fatherland in a communal song about the greatness of their country. Again, the equality of everybody in an equal education. And then just that freedom is pretty swell, which you can see in this poster behind me. In our country, we want to substitute morality for egoism, honesty for honor, principles for customs, duty for decorum, the rule of reason for the tyranny of custom, the contempt of vice for the contempt of misfortune, pride for insolence, magnanimity for vanity, love of glory for love of money, good people for well-bred people, merit for intrigue, genius for wit, truth for pompous action, warmth of happiness for boredom of sensuality, greatness of man for pettiness of the great, a magnanimous, powerful, happy people for a polite, frivolous, despicable people. That is to say, all the virtues and all the miracles of the Republic for all the vices and all the absurdities of the monarchy. And so, Robespierre here is making the point that the people of the Republic and the people of the Revolution and the values that the Revolution expounds are much better for everyone than what is represented by the monarchy. And so that's why you see he says things like good people for well-bred people, you know. For example, Richard Branson here is my examples of a positive, hard-working, successful business person. So this is a great representation of the bourgeoisie, you know, if he was in revolutionary France, somebody who's made himself what he is and has benefited the population as a result of it. And on the other side, we have this lampooning cartoon of the monarchs at the time, dressed up like women and slurping their soup down in a gluttonous manner. And so, warmth of happiness for boredom of sensuality. That boredom of sensuality is the reliance on sensual pleasures, prostitutes, mistresses, drugs and alcohol that was so popular among the nobility at the time, where warmth of happiness would be represented by the third estate, the bourgeoisie of the time, who really want to find success in the merit of their work. In one word, we want to fulfill the wishes of nature, accomplish the destiny of humanity, keep the promises of philosophy, and absolve Providence from the long reign of crime and tyranny. So, in a word, they want to manifest natural law, as envisioned by folks like Rousseau. They want to accomplish the destiny of humanity, and this is where you see kind of pre-Hegelian ideas about a deterministic worldview where humans will actualize natural law through revolutions in their country, perhaps. And then providence is this idea of sort of a deistic force controlling the destiny of humanity, fate, if you will, and release fate from the control by tyranny and the nobility. So to illustrate this paragraph, I have on the right here a piece of pro-National Convention propaganda, and on my left a piece of anti-National Convention propaganda. And I'd like to take a moment to take a closer look at these two particular pieces of political art. On the left, we see this piece of propaganda, which is in favor of the National Convention, and it's entitled "The People, Eater of Kings." And representing the people, we have this statue of Hercules. And this etching actually represented a proposed statue that the National Convention wanted to set up in Paris, and other sources suggest that perhaps they also wanted to set it up on the borders of France. And so you have Hercules here as the people, dressed as a sans culotte, people without fancy pants. Notice he has regular old trousers rolled up. He's bare-chested. He's not particularly clean-shaven, a representative of the masses of people. He has the king here, gripped in his fist, and he's cooking him over this fire. Here he has a club to protect liberty, and he stands on this monument, and down here you have a fallen angel representing the falling of the clergy, and over here you have shields and swords with the king's crest on them representing the fall of the monarchy. Over here you have the French tricolor, the flag of the Revolution, over the ramparts protecting France. And out here you have the levy en masse, the armies of the National Convention, to fight the forces of reaction against the liberty of the revolution, manned by the kings of all the other countries of Europe, who will soon follow the same fate as the king here of France. And there's, you can see some other kings or nobility are also burning on this fire. Now over here on the right, we have a piece of propaganda that's against the National Convention and is likely published right after Robespierre's death. Had it been published before Robespierre's death, the artist would likely have been killed if they could have been found. This is titled, "We Will Eat the World and the Kings Will Be Silent." And this reference of cannibalism depicts the idea that the National Convention's desires for destruction won't be satiated until they gobble up the entire world. And so here you have the representative of the National Convention, a henchman of Robespierre perhaps, and he's a frightening figure, crazy looking in his eyes, with his mouth agape, ready to swallow up what is at once a globe with continents on it drawn in, and a sphere which is representative of the king. And you can see he's about to chow down on this. And then, as this scary, skinny figure is tromping across the ground, you can see he's stomping on the crucifix, a holy Bible, a bishop's mitre is this staff here, and then I believe we also have a crown here. Behind the mitre, in this little spot here, you can see the decapitated head of a woman, somebody recently killed in the Reign of Terror, and then of course this monument dedicated to the leadership of Robespierre is stacked upon a bunch of skulls. And in the back we see the National Convention meeting place here, with the ironic inscription, "The Fatherland is grateful." So on the left we have pro-National Convention, Hercules representing the people. And on the right, we have anti-National Convention, this crazy, dirty, unkempt, skinny figure gobbling up the world as the National Convention swallowed up all the enemies that they perceive to be against liberty. What kind of government can realize these marvels? Only a democratic or republican government. But what is the fundamental principle of democratic or popular government? That is to say, the essential strength that sustains it and makes it move. It is virtue. I am speaking of the public virtue which brought about so many marvels in Greece and Rome, and which must bring about much more astonishing ones yet in Republican France. Of that virtue which is nothing more than love of fatherland and of its laws. And so he's saying, look, and I have statues of Greece and Rome behind me, like Roman senators, and folks who would be speaking in the Greek form. So what he's saying is, virtue is the love of rule by law, equality under the law, Republican ideas, those direct election ideas promoted by Rousseau and so loved by Robespierre, that this is the one big piece of what the revolutionaries are trying to accomplish in France, and it's this virtue that's going to guide them to emancipate the population, lead them to equality. And he goes on. If the strength of popular government in peacetime is virtue, the strength of popular government in revolution is both virtue and terror. Terror without virtue is disastrous. Virtue without terror is powerless. Terror is nothing but prompt, severe, and inflexible justice. It is thus an emanation of virtue. It is less a particular principle than a consequence of the general principle of democracy applied to the most urgent needs of the fatherland. It is said that terror is the strength of despotic government. Does ours then resemble despotism? Yes, as the sword that shines in the hands of heroes of liberty resemble the one which the satellites of tyranny are armed. And so he's saying that virtue is great, but in the middle of a counter-revolution and an international war, which is what the National Convention is facing, virtue is words. Virtue is powerless. And unless it is backed up by terror, and yes, it's going to be the same terror that's used by tyrants, by despots, by kings, by dictators throughout history, but for those people, terror was used to accomplish their own selfish goals. But for the Republicans of revolutionary France to use terror, it is only to create in the future a truly free and Republican-style government. And without the terror, the virtue is meaningless because they will be run over by the reactionary forces of the monarchy, the clergy, and the international nobility that has boots on the ground in militaries in France. He goes on. If the strength of popular government in peacetime is virtue, the strength of popular government in revolution is both virtue and terror. Terror without virtue is disastrous. Virtue without terror is powerless. Terror is nothing but prompt, severe, and inflexible justice. It is thus an emanation of virtue. It is less a particular principle than a consequence of the general principle of democracy applied to the most urgent needs of the fatherland. And to depict these ideas, he says, yes, in peacetime, the strength of a republic is in virtue. And to illustrate virtue, I have this very virtuous mother here with her soon-to-be very virtuous baby on this peaceful pastoral scene in the middle of the countryside. That's in peacetime. And then, in revolution, we have the terror, illustrated here by the beheading of Marie Antoinette at the hands of the National Convention. The nobility must be cut down, the reactionary forces must be destroyed in order for freedom to achieve its ultimate aims of equality. Let the despot govern his brutalized subjects through terror. He is right as a despot. Subdue the enemies of liberty through terror, and you will be right as founders of the republic. The government of the revolution is the despotism of liberty against tyranny. So yes, those in favor of liberty are going to have to act like despots and use terror if they are going to defeat the tyrannical forces of international nobility and clergy. And to illustrate this, I have these two gigantic explosions illustrating the terror that the National Convention and the Committee of Public Safety are going to use, but through that terror, they are going to produce the democracy and Republican-style government that is the virtue of the revolution depicted by all of these people being able to vote peacefully right behind them. So thanks again for listening.